The meeting will the meeting will be recorded, and we will have it as a link for you at Jean-Paul's website, which will be shared with you. So whenever you want to go there and listen, you can. And I am inviting you after each presentation, which will last at maximum 15-20 minutes, to make some questions if you find the discussion provoking, and participate as much as you can. Okay? This meeting today is violence against women in politics in Southeast Europe. This is because the increased violence in public speech, as per NDI report. Do you know which organization NDI is? National Democratic Institute? The American Institute? They've done a report in 2021 on political participation and violence against women in politics in Southeastern Europe. And they found out that the violence has decreased space for dialogue and pluralism, regardless of the women's political representation progress in the Balkans. Women in Southeastern Europe remain significantly underrepresented at all levels of political decision-making, facing barriers to participation and violence when politically active. Closely connected with patriarchy and overall perception of women in Southeast European societies, violence against women in politics is underreported, normalized, and tolerated, as the majority of women who have experienced attacks are likely to remain silent about them. The violence has enduring consequences on women, their families, political carers, and on the health of democracy. This webinar today will address the causes, impact, and forms of violence against women candidates and office holders in representative and executive bodies and strategies to counter it. This webinar is part of the Gender and Politics Research in Southeast Europe webinar series initiated by the Jean-Paul Network, aiming at promoting research and researchers from the region. This webinar is hosted by us, University of Tirana, with the support of Heinrich Böll Stiftung and Global Unit for Feminism and Gender Democracy. The speakers of today are Liliana Cicaric, Principal Research Fellow from Institute of Social Sciences, Belgrade. Jure Skubic, Assistant and Researcher, Institute for Contemporary History, Ljubljana University. Marcela Dauti and Geldona Metaj, from Department of Social Work and Social Policy of University Tirana. Myself, the moderator, I am Merita Poni, a professor of sociology of Tirana University. This webinar comes in the time of elections in Albania in May. We will have general elections for the parliament, and there will be elections in Kosovo as well in February. I don't know whether elections are going elsewhere too in Serbia?
No.
No, in Serbia?
We had
okay.
This year, yeah.
Okay. In Bosnia?
No, but there is one
We don't know.
happening in Croatia in December, the presidential one, and there are a few women also with very opposite thinking.
Okay, and in Slovenia?
No, our final elections were in 2022. So the next one in 2026.
Okay, we're having elections in May, and in Kosovo, they're having elections on February. So now let's see how the participation of women and girls, boys and men is going on in our region. And if we're having questions, we can ask the speakers and they will discuss with you in a form of dialogue about your questions. So we can start. Do we have volunteers or shall I go by the list?
It's okay.
Lily?
I can start. I can start. It's not.
You can start.
Yes.
Let's hear Professor Liliana. Thank you, Lily.
Yeah. Thank you, Merita. Thank you having me here, invited me, and I also enjoy very much to have this lecture this morning. I'm Liliana Čičkarić, as Merita said, coming from Institute for Social Sciences from Belgrade. And primary focus of my research is women and politics, and part of this research is violence against women in politics. And I would like, I'm going first because I would like to give a lecture, rather introductory, to have a few words about the concept and also about the research we had in Serbia. First, violence against women in politics is a very complex phenomenon and rests on gender equality, unequal distribution of power, and also on political inequalities, unequal participation and representation of women in politics. Over the past 20 years, as women have increasingly participated in Serbian politics, the political culture has been marked by a growing presence of gender stereotypes, sexism, misogyny, hate speech, semiotic violence, harassment, intimidation, and so on. This environment is conducive to increasing violence against women in politics, and we can say a greater proportion of women in political office is associated with the higher prevalence of violence against women in politics, unfortunately. Violence serves firstly to reproduce and maintain patriarchal values, hegemonic masculinity, undermine democracy, and eroding the possibilities for women's full political empowerment. Also represents a significant challenge in all countries, affected women across a range of socio-economic groups and life stages. Deteriorates political selection and quality, and damaging impacts might be particularly relevant for women's representation in politics. Violence against women in politics operates to create an atmosphere of fear in order to achieve political goals. It is employed in authoritarian regimes as a tool of repression, as we know here, especially in the region, and in democratic ones. It challenges core values of the political system. I would like to say that the key factors that have to be involved in one systematic research on violence against women in politics is the context, the nature and extent of violence, the motive behind it, motives, the effects, and also awareness and practices in combating it. I would say that the research which we had and Marita mentioned before in 2022 carried by National Democratic Institute, it's somehow in connection with this I mentioned before. And I would say that they detected that psychological violence is the most prevalent form of abuse perpetrated against women engaged in political activities in Southeast Europe. It encompasses a range of acts prepared in person and increasingly online, which we'll see in the other presentation, with the aim of deterring their participation or rendering them less effective as political actors. And I would say that this, my speech will rest on research carried out in 2020 in Serbia. It was conducted and supported by OECE, and they detected 3 distinct categories or forms of political violence: structural, cultural, and direct one. Structural is identified is a form which is grounded in social structures featuring inequality, manifested through unequal chances, limited access to particular resources for individual actors, and reproduced through long-standing institutional norms and practices. Cultural form, I mean the violence in the sphere of culture, includes symbolic sphere, ideology, religion, language, art, science, which can be used by justify and legitimize structural violence. And also the third one is a direct. They said, my colleagues from this research, they said direct, because it's most often perceived through various forms of behavior, manifested like physical, psychological, economic, sexual, or digital violence. And as we know before, I think that this survey or research that done in 2020 mostly stands on the large amount of literature and findings from previous research from our colleagues in European and especially in America, United States. And we'll see now how it's going with the specific forms of violence, and also with the examples and the answers from the respondents. Firstly, it was an interview carried with women politicians. It's not just, it's a qualitative research, and it's very important that I will not give some statistics or any numbers, just qualification of the most recognized and the most exposed violence that those women had in their political experience. First, segregation of duties and labor. First, I will say about the structural violence. And first, that detected segregation of duties and labor exploitation of women in parties, manifested in political parties, manifested in assigning administrative duties to women, while the decision-making positions are most often reserved for men. Women are exploited through excessive volunteer work or tasks considered female duties, organizing, catering, making coffees, taking minutes, and so on. The other form is unequal distribution of positions within the party and barriers to women's promotion to higher positions or to government office or political offices. It represents a weaker power, a weaker economic position, a weaker social networking, and also unable in inter-party promotion. The candidacy and nominations of women often take place in narrow cycles of men, especially male party leaders, as we know already. The other form is trading in the mandates of women without their knowledge. Also is detected, and women do not have influence on the posts they will take. Their legitimate right to perform particular duties is taken away from them in intra-party and inter-party haggling processes. Also, very known marginalization and removal of women from parties. The experience of respondents show when women demonstrate autonomy and integrity, achieve greater power, or reach a position higher than it could be expected, they often became marginalized within the party and also very often removed from the party. It's experience for our respondents also. And also economic violence. It's a sort of violence that comprise systematic denial of resources or restricting access to resources for women politicians. It stands on lack of support to women's capacity for fundraising initiatives, disrespect for gender finance provisions, and the prevention of gender-sensitive campaign finance reform. Also, we could detect cultural violence in the form of sexism and misogyny. Misogyny is a very, very specific and a very complex phenomenon, which is mostly expressed by, we can say, pejorative expressions, sexist labels relating firstly on age, race, ethnicity, religion, and sexuality. Also, I would like very much to stress the semiotic violence, and Mona-Lena Krook is very much wrote about this. Its reproduction, in especially naturalization and rationalization of violence, and especially political discourse in the media and everyday life. Also symbolic violence theorized by Bourdieu's discipline used against another to confirm individuals' placement in social hierarchy. And what is specific with this sort of violence is a subtle, euphemized, unrecognized, very often unrecognized, and also from women, not only for men, and sometimes unbelievable. It's something that we could say that it's possible, but it's really possible, especially among women politicians, and they detect it very often among their colleagues. And also, we said marginalization and invisibility. Respondents confirmed that they are less present in the media, especially at the provincial and local levels. They are, we can say, almost invisible on local and provincial levels. And also, when we are talking about media here in Serbia, especially the national ones that we many of them, women are very instrumentalized, especially the women in politics, and also they have a very unique role, I can say. It's just to be and to serve to the party leader and the ideology of ruling party. Also, I will say now, because there are not so much time, I will say about the psychological abuse. It's also very important sort of violence. The sort of behavior intended to cause fear, emotional harm, damage to whom, on the first place, women's reputation and social status. And respondents indicated at most frequent intimidation, denigration, verbal insults, very important gaslighting, threats, blackmailing, and discrediting in public. All this sort of violence aimed at diminishing the power of female respondents, their self-confidence, integrity, credibility, and legitimacy. And that's, I think, the most toxic the role of this sort of violence, used to attack women from opposite parties, to discredit them as political opponents, but also to attack women from the same party as when it comes to political competition. It's also present. Now we have the sexual harassment, various form of undesired, well, non-verbal, psychological behavior, sex nature, aimed at violating the dignity of women and creating a threatening and inimical, degrading atmosphere. Respondents also confirmed that is often highly tolerated, relativized, naturalized, and rationalized, considering as a part of everyday treatment of women. Also, respondents stated a broad range of gender-based insults, commenting on the physical appearance of women, unwanted touching, inappropriate forms of communication, including messages, calls, SMS and mobile, non-verbal communication, also sexist jokes that are rather naturalized and normalized in political discourse. And also, we are coming to psychological violence. It's infrequent, but have documented the experience of women politicians from research concerned conflicts with some institutional security officers who block entrance or passage, throwing of objects, or witnessing physical conflicts of male members of opposing parties in atmosphere of pre-election campaigns. And the other sort of violence, it's, we say, stalking. It's the gravest form of violence, lasts continuously over a longer period, and various forms of psychological torture through different channels, from direct verbal and almost physical aggression, with content representing the extreme example of misogyny and sexism, to hate speech and so on. It is sometimes hidden from public, but sometimes open with a significant support of media. Also, finally, we have a digital violence. I will not talk about more about that, because the other colleague from Slovenia, they have research in this segment. Just I want to say that in the last maybe decade or more, the internet violence growing more and more every day. Communication actively by cyber technology, it's very harmful and it's very toxic, and targeted individuals as well as the groups also. And especially participants in this research detected that it's rather expressed like psychological violence and toxic atmosphere, and also some kind of misogyny and sexism spreading through social networks. And most often mention the tabloid media, also tabloid media whose editorial policy is under strong control of parties, of political parties. In Serbia, it means by a dominant ruling party and their, satellites, and also the media that are in the service of this party. And who are the perpetrators of violence? And what are they doing? Most often they are focused on women's bodies and traditional roles as mothers and wives, to undermine women's roles as competent politicians. It's no patriarchal, and also the traditionalized society that we are living still, or I would say a pre-political society. The sexualized dimension of attacks against female politicians is evident in online communication especially, and perpetrators are diverse, but of course that in most cases male party colleagues, superiors in party structures or government offices, also party leaders, also political opponents, and so on. Respondents point out that case when media change their attitude towards a concrete women politician in accordance with the shift in perspective of high-ranking male political leaders through their comments in the media and on the web, and also on social networks and portals, and so on. I would say that the consequences of violence against women's politics are are huge and very hardly be protected and in some way gay away from women politicians. And I would say that they are, especially in their familiar lives, also they concerning their health, also political participation, also the work, the place. I mean, the parliament, the political institutions, and so on, the places where they are working. Also, it's very important that very often they are not understood, and not the violence is not recognized for wider audience, wider community, and sometimes also from their own families. And also they have many, as you know, many problems with children, also with children in schools which are in school period, and so on and so on. There are so many problems. And also we can say, and it's elaborated very nice in this study of National Democratic Institute from 2022. And I would say that when you research the violence against women, it's a very specific part of social phenomenon. It's very important to have in mind two things. That physical violence may be most appropriately addressed through legal channels. But the other ones, symbolic, sexual, psychological, economic, and semiotic, or so on, they are very different to be recognized, to be detected, to be proved, and also sanctions, and to make some interventions separately from legislative proposals, and so on. On the other hand, it's very important to make difference between political violence and sexism in institutions, especially because violence is forceful act used to disrupt regular political process, carried out with explicit intent to affect politics, targets political actors, women in politics, and so on. But everyday sexism enforces male dominance and perpetuates gender inequality, which occurs in most arenas, not exclusive in politics, unfortunately. And I would say that I think it's enough from my part. I can also say that in Serbia we have mechanisms of protection of violence against women, but also there is always question between the interventions and using these mechanisms on a proper way, or just it's a huge problem with the victims of violence that are in very difficult situation to very often to carry this burden of very toxic and very roughly demonstrate the hate and also the misunderstanding of wider community. That's the problem, and we had several cases, and still now we have cases in legal procedures, and also with our actors, and also with women from a very small town from Serbia, who faced a huge amount of hatred and misogyny and the difficult burden of, but finally she succeeded to make her case positive, and to have some kind of satisfaction of the positive solution of her problem. But it's still very rare, and it's very difficult to have some case like it was Maria Lukic or other very positive cases in Serbia. Also, we had so many problems with the other local community in Chupria, that we have a local, I can say, the local boss that had under his feet and finally, and fortunately, he's not alive anymore. But so many years he was the founder and prosecutor, and also the very toxic person that instrumentalized and also spread misogyny and sexism, and it was not prevented in any way, in any case, because of fear and because of the main problem that those women and also those girls, because there are so many young women with him. But so it's difficult because that kind of, that kind of behavior, it's I know it's transferred to politics, from everyday life, from cultural habitus. It's transferring to political life and to political institutions, and it's very hard to compress. So we have also a law on prevention of domestic violence, also national gender equality strategy, also strategy for prevention and combating of gender-based violence. But it's going very slowly and very hardly. And okay, I will not say anymore. It's enough from my part. Thank you. Thank you very much.
In the auditorium, you will have to unmute. There was just some background noise.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lidiana. I think we will proceed with the next talk. So at the end, we can have some questions. How do you think? Okay? And you may take notes while the speakers talk. So at the end, we can gather all the questions and address, okay, the issues. I thank you very much for your patience and for staying. The discussion will become more lively when we will have questions on plate and something to consume as a dialogue. Now, I will pass the floor to Jure, who's gonna tell us about the reality in Slovenia, but in Western Balkans as well. Jure, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Can you see the presentation? Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Great. Hi everyone, also from my end. My name is Jure Skubic, and I'm a researcher and assistant at the University of Ljubljana, Faculty of Arts, and at the Institute of Contemporary History. Thank you to Professor Poni for inviting me here to show what we are doing in Slovenia and what's actually going on. Now, first thing, this presentation, as it was already mentioned, it should have been. I should have it together with my colleague Milica Antić-Gabar, but unfortunately she's away. So we decided to do a joint presentation. So I'll take just a slightly bit more time just to explain everything. Now, before I start talking about our research and what we're doing and what's going on in Slovenia, I think it's really important that we all just take a minute and actually understand what we are talking about when we talk about violence against women in politics, and especially violence against women in politics on social media. A lot of things have already been said. I will start by saying that you always need to keep in mind that it is a hybrid concept. It is not like a single form of violence. It is a concept that consists of various different concepts, and I'll try to illustrate how this works. So firstly, we start with violence. Okay, so violence is like the basis, the gist of everything, and as you probably know, it is a really hard concept to define. In social sciences, definitely one of the most hard to define concepts. Why? Because its definition actually depends on various cultural, social, and political contexts. What I mean by that is that a violent event, an event which we in Slovenia, for example, might understand and perceive as violent, might not be perceived as such in, I don't know, a different context in perhaps any other country or any other part of the world. So it is really important to think about the context that violence appears in. Also, if you check if you just scroll the internet and search a bit about violence, you'll see so many definitions that you will have a hard time deciding which definition actually is the right one. And I can assure you there are various definitions which are the right ones, and all of them also have something that you can just disregard and be critical to. However, they all have various common characteristics, like an intent, like the motive. Violence is something that is intentional, that it is legally, socially, morally deviant behavior which causes harm, and so on, that there are different types of violence, and so on. Here I give you the most commonly used definition, which was proposed by the World Health Organization in 2002. However, well, it is the most commonly used often, but we still need to be a bit critical towards it. But I won't go into this criticism right now because we really don't have the time. What is important to know is that violence manifests in various forms. As I said, it is an intentional use of force and or power, and it causes harm. It is an unwanted, deviant behavior, and has serious consequences for victims and targets. That's the first concept that we focus on. Then the next one, the violence we talk about is a violence that happens against women. Meaning what? Meaning that it is a gender-based violence. So we need to think and understand this gender perspective. To always have it in mind. Meaning that when you talk about gender-based violence, you talk about violence that is aimed at people of specific gender or gender identity. In our case, women. Now, the intent of violence against women is to discredit politically and socially active women, to remove them from active political participation, to dissuade them from participating in politics, and to move them back to the private sphere where they stereotypically belong. Here I second what Professor Čičkarič has already mentioned, so that to their attributed roles as, mothers, housekeepers, caretakers, and so on. When we talk about perpetrators can be men or women. There's no we should keep that in mind. However, research shows that most commonly the perpetrators of such violence are men, although, as I said, not exclusively. And what are the reasons behind it? You know, if you know a little bit about politics and so on, you can, or if you are more into politics and checking what's going on, you can see that historically politics has always been a male-dominated field, and the reasons behind, you know, using violence against women is to somehow maintain this patriarchal social order. It is a mechanism of repression. When we talk about politics, it's to maintain the status quo and to legitimize the supremacy of a male role. Then we move to the next part, you know, to the next constituting part of this type of violence, and it is that it happens in politics. It is directed towards women who are active in politics. Now, just a bit of background. So the last few decades, there have been positive changes for women in democratic political lives. We can say all over the world. Women have become more visible. They are more involved in the field of politics. They're participating in debates, not only in political debates, they're also more visible on social media, discussing political and legislative stuff. They also achieved more prominent political positions. Now, this was mostly because of various systemic measures that have been taking place since the, let's be very broad, but let's say from the 60s onwards. Gender quotas, I think you've probably heard about them. They have made a tremendous, in most countries, they caused a tremendous positive changes in descriptive representation of women in politics. However, because of the improvements that have started, also new problems emerged. You know, sexism, misogyny, aggression, harassment, various types of violence that Professor Chichkaric has already mentioned. I just enumerated a few. There are many, many more. So women are facing new problems, and especially women who are active in politics. Now, mind you, I'm not talking only about politicians, although our research the research I'll talk about a bit later did focus specifically on politicians, but women in politics are a much broader scope, meaning, okay, yes, politicians, ministers, also leaders of NGOs, human rights activists, feminist activists, women in high social and political positions, etc., etc. So we should not be, when we think about violence against women in politics, we should not be focusing only on politicians. And now to the last part of our hybrid concept. It is a type of violence that happens on social media. Now, it's already been mentioned that social media have transformed our way of thinking, our way of life, our way of doing things tremendously in the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years. Such type of violence therefore arose to prominence quickly due to this quick technological development of the new technologies that emerged and developed so quickly. Now, as you probably know, this online world is nowadays accessible almost to anyone. It is mostly not regulated. It is oft, I mean, it can be anonymized. We as social media users can always create new identities. We can live this virtual virtual lives hidden behind the anonymity, and there's actually nothing that can be nothing serious that can be done to prevent someone hiding behind the anonymous profile to start committing, perpetrating violence towards women. When I talk about new media, I especially I especially talk about Twitter, so which is now called X, Facebook, Instagram, also, you know, I don't know if you know them, but you know, Discord, Telegram, Snapchat, other online platforms, also online blogs, and so on. I won't go into detail. I won't talk in detail about the forms of violence. You probably know most of them. And as I said, the main problem is the anonymity, the acceptance of normalization of violence, severe consequence for targets, etc., etc. And now that we have this established, we have to look at the concept that we were dealing with in our own research. Now, violence against women, as we said, is a type of violence directed at women because of their gender. We're specifically talking about violence against women and not gender-based violence or political violence or gender-based political violence. No, we talk about violence against women because its main targets are women. They are the targets of it because they participate in politics, they actively participate in politics, and with that, they actually break the stereotypical social norms of women having to stay at home, being mothers, taking care of the children and their husbands or partners who are allowed to participate in politics. It is a type of violence that occurs on social media, especially on those social media which are used for political communication. In Slovenia, that's most commonly Twitter or X. Also, sometimes Facebook. Although a few weeks ago I've learned that in other countries there might be also politicians might also use Instagram or Facebook more prominently than Twitter. But that's not the case. That's not the case in Slovenia. And as I said, it is a violence with severe consequences for targets. And social media are used to discredit and attack women because they are women and because they are in politics. Now, at the bottom of the slide, you can see similar research. There's a growing body of literature which focuses on violence against women in politics, and nowadays also violence against women in politics on social media. However, we are still at the very beginning. You can see a few of the related literature here. Not all of them are enumerated, but perhaps I would focus your attention on the third one. So in Japan, for example, they were doing a really in-depth research about violence against women, which was directed towards four very prominent women politicians. Also, the fifth one, the Finland one, and there's a lot of research going on also in Great Britain. I don't know how much you know about the British politics, but Great Britain has largely been induced. They've started with such research after the murder of Jo Cox, one of the prominent women politicians, and also after the aggression and violence that was directed towards an African American politician, the politician Diane Abbott, in I think it was in 2017. So, you know, things are happening. Research are being conducted, and that's what actually motivated us to start thinking about Slovenia. So Slovenia, as you know, we are not immune to violence against women, and that's why Milica and I, we decided we need to do something to see what's going on in Slovenia. We started in 2022. It was our project. What we started working on was not, we did not want it to be a research. We started, just checking what is going on Twitter. And what has happened is this year, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, our paper was published in one of the quite prominent Slovenian journals. It is in Slovenian, but if you want it, you can always Google it and you'll get access. It's in free access. So we said we needed to do something to see and to check what's happening in Slovenia. So what did we do? We did qualitative and quantitative analysis of violence against women in politics on social media in Slovenia. And why did we do it? So as I said, we started in 2022, and 2022 was a rather difficult and life-changing year for Slovenian politics. We had our last parliamentary election in April of 2022, and because of the previous quite authoritarian government, there were a lot of protests going on against it. There was a high activity of women politicians, publicly active women, women-led civil society organizations, NGOs, etc., etc. Women politicians started to speak out loud. They started to be present in the debates and so on. And the consequence of all of that was an extremely sexist, misogynistic, and aggressive discourse on X. So that's why we said we needed to check the X and see what kind of discourse that is and what's happening. We were collecting our data between February 9th, 2022. That was the date when when the president of Slovenia announced parliamentary election, and ended on April 24th, 2022, which was an election Sunday. Who were we focused on? As I said, we did not focus so broadly on all women in politics, but mostly on those politicians and potential candidates who actively participated in public debates, who had the possibility of winning of being elected into important political positions or appointed to important political positions, and those women politicians who were actively participating on X. Most of them were from center to center left parties, but also there were a few from center right and right parties. How did we collect the data? Now, mind you that at that time we were not very familiar with computational methods on collecting Twitter data. That's why we did a manual data collection. So we took our phones, we opened our Twitter and scrolled through Twitter, taking screenshots of misogynistic, violent tweets, comments, posts. We saved those screenshots, we transcribed them, coded them, to get the metadata, who were the perpetrators, who were the targets, and so on. And then we analyzed the metadata as well as the discourse. Altogether, we collected 372 posts. 73 of those were discarded because they were not focusing on politicians directly, and this left us with 299 posts, which were then included in the final analysis. Now, as I said, the first one was quantitative, meaning here we did three things. So first one, we checked the gender structure of the perpetrators. The second one, the share of authentic or fictitious X user profiles, and the third one, the share of misogynistic posts or comments. And then the qualitative, and this one is even more interesting, we did a critical discourse analysis on comments and posts, and we tried to classify the discourse, and I think we succeeded quite well into the most common categories. Here I just enumerate our hypothesis. So the first one was that perpetrators were mostly men, targets more frequently those women who are highly active. The second one, that the perpetrators mostly use fictitious or anonymized user profiles. The third one, that the majority of violence will actually happen in comments, not in original posts. And the fourth one, that we can classify the discourse in most common categories, which are fluid, culturally, politically, and socially contextually dependent. But I'll talk about that a bit later. And now for the interesting part. So what did we discover? So here you see the first graph. So who were the perpetrators of the violence? As you can imagine, most of them were men, right? So almost 70% of them were men. However, the 16% who we analyzed as women perpetrators, we thought was a rather high percentage. Now the second graph, the profiles of the perpetrators, this was really unexpected. 50% of the profiles were real, meaning that perpetrators actually used their own name, surname, profile pictures with their kids, with I don't know, their pets and so on. Also, they included some personal info into the bio section and so on. Nearly 26% of those profiles were fictitious, and around 24 we could not determine whether they are real or fictitious. And as we expected, most of the violence was happening in the comment section. Only a few instances of violence happened in the original posts. I don't think that's very interesting to look at, but just to show you that the three most common targets of violence were actually left-wing politicians. However, the fifth one was from the right-wing political party. I hope you saw that clearly. And then also interesting was that one of the politicians who was actually very much active in political debates did not receive. We found no instances of violence directed at her. In addition, almost 14% of violent tweets were actually aimed at women politicians in general. So not at a specific politician, but they talked about women politicians in general, which was also really telling in our opinion. Okay, now for especially interesting part, the discourse classification. So we created 7 categories of violent discourse that we think nicely round up the most common types of discourse that we find. And the first one is women are seen as intruders, unfit, and incompetent to participate in politics. Now below you can see, I hope you can see them well, some examples which are translated into English. So talking about women as stupid, as rude, as corrupt, as lying parasites, and so on. And mind you, these are direct transcriptions and translations. The second one is the domestication of women. So women should be put into the home sphere, should be dissuaded to participate in politics. Put the women in the kitchen. They should be, breastfeeding their children instead of attacking people in parliament. They should not be present in parliament and so on. So they should be confined to the home sphere. The third one, so objectifying, and the fourth one, sexualizing women. Now, as you can see, those two are quite interrelated. they both in a way focus on women's bodies, on women's visual appearance, on what they look like. She got rather fat. I don't know. Check out that woman next to her, not bad at all. You know, she can't hold her legs together, etc., etc. Also, here we saw examples of violence where women, where it is implied that women actually use sexual intercourse to achieve high, important, prominent positions in politics. And also we see the types of examples where women are just too ugly, you know, to be even visible in public. The fifth one was the most common one, and we titled it Animalistic Dehumanization of Women. Now, this means that they compared women to various animals, sheep, I don't know, monkeys, dogs, pigs, goats, hens, and etc., etc. And as I said, this was the most prominent. The sixth one, silencing women violently. So if there is no other option, then we need to use a severe form of violence to silence them, even hint of killing women, telling them that they are unworthy of living, and so on. And the seventh one, and that's the last one, nationalistic attacks on women because of their ethnic background, origin, name, surname. This was also a really common category in Slovenian politics, which actually originates from the feeling that Slovenians, that we as Slovenians are superior to others, that we should not have people from other countries in Slovenia, that and even if and not only that, they should not be present in politics. They are so women who do not have who have a name and a surname which would not be traditionally attributed as Slovenian, they are discredited immediately, and so on. Also comparing, so using the ideological stances like communists, socialists, and so on. This was all included in this category. Now for the conclusion, if we assess the hypothesis that we set at the beginning, so the perpetrators in Slovenia as well were men. Targets were most commonly women that were active in social media, that were active in public discourse, and also those women who were expected to win a good election result and were therefore considered dangerous. The second hypothesis was rejected because in Slovenia, it's not the case that most of the violence comes from anonymous or fictitious profiles, but more than half of the profiles were actually real, genuine. Also confirmed was that the majority of violence was present in comments, especially in comments under posts made by women politicians in question, those you saw enumerated. And the fourth one is that we can classify the violent discourse into several categories, but we need to be mindful that such categories are politically and socially and culturally dependent, meaning that the categories that work in Slovenia might not and probably won't work in other countries, or and you should always, take into consideration the political context and the context of the country that you are researching. Of course, our study had several limitations. I won't go into them right now. It was a pilot study. We understand that, but it was a good basis for us to start. It is also the basis I am working on for my PhD thesis, which I'm currently finishing, and for the projects which we are planning in future, which will be much more elaborate and much more developed, especially when it comes to data collection methods, and also conducting interviews with women politicians to actually see how they themselves perceive such violence and the consequences that this violence has towards them. Now that's as far as my presentation goes. I hope I was not too long. I would just like to leave you with a question here: how and why should we move forward? Now, I don't expect you to find the answer right now, but just perhaps as perspective sociologists think about this, also with regard to your election the next year, perhaps try to see what's going on in your own country, and think about to what politics has actually become, and how far it can actually the violence can actually go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jure. Very interesting to hear about the Slovenia situation. I must say that your last 10 minutes were frozen and defrozen. So we had some technical problems, not by our side. The IT said that we are okay with the fiber for internet. It was from the host. So probably, yeah, there are problems there with the internet. But okay, we had the slides, luckily, so we could follow you, although we couldn't hear you very well. And the last talk is from our professor, Marcela Dauti. And after Marci, I will please, I will beg you, keep it a little bit short. So, because students know you, and the Albania situation comes last because it's very important for us, and maybe this is where you can have more questions about participation of girls and women in politics. And now let's hear to Professor Marci. Thank you, Marci.
Okay, thank you very much. So together with Geldona, we are going to talk about violence against women in Albanian politics. And yes, I agree with Mary. I think it's great for students if they plan to run for office. They will be aware of the barriers that they will face, so it's good to be prepared. It's not going to be very long because, fortunately, Liliana and Jure set the stage for us. We don't need to spend a lot of time on the conceptual framework or to share evidence about violence against women in politics, globally speaking. We will discuss a bit more in depth about our case study. So this is a research project that was supported by UNDP a few years ago. We conducted a survey with politicians, women and men, to understand their experiences of political violence. We also conducted sort of a smaller study which looked exclusively on the experiences of women in politics. So today, together with Geldona, we are going to share with you some information about the qualitative piece. We will not talk about the survey, but we welcome your questions if you want to see differences between men and women, and we can discuss them more in depth. Okay. Very briefly, we'll share with you a little bit of evidence about the types, motives, and impacts of violence against women in politics, trying not to be repetitive. We'll share the methodology, some of the main findings, and then conclusions. I will start, and then Geldona will continue to share with you some findings from our research project and our main conclusions. Okay. So we draw on the framework of Bardal and her co-authors, And the idea with the framework is that political violence is gendered, so it affects men and women differently. And to better understand political violence, we need to differentiate between the motives, the types, and impacts of political violence. Okay, there is plenty of evidence showing that women are more vulnerable than men when it comes to political violence. And Liliana and Yuri shared so many examples. And we know now that women in politics are targets of sexualized and denigrating talk and rumors, or verbal abuse, physical assault and threat, and so forth. Also, there is an increasing understanding that on a global scale, women are often subjected to violence that occurs in private and it's not publicly denounced, which is exactly connected with what Liliana was saying, that changes in legislation can be more successful in addressing physical violence. And when it comes to psychological violence, for instance, it's very difficult. Also, the presentation of Jure made it clear that perpetrators use violence to preserve political power and reinforce women's marginalization in politics. And even though Jure said at the end that there might be differences based on context, I think his findings from Slovenia are very much applicable in the case of Albania as well. So many similarities in there. We also know that violence diminishes women's political ambition and affects their thoughts of living politics. There is not a lot of evidence when it comes to Southeast Europe. There might be research projects maybe conducted in local languages, but they are not always accessible. And we were discussing with Gildona in the last couple of days, we need more literature about the region, and I'm very happy we're having this webinar to share the information in English. So we know that there's low levels of awareness of what constitutes political violence, and there is fear of speaking up and reporting cases of political violence. In Albania, there is not a lot of literature on violence against women in politics, and this is one of the reasons why UNDP supported the study. Before the study we conducted, another one looked into mainly legislation, and one of the things that was found is that political parties lack clear rules for addressing violence against politicians, and we are aware that there are discussions going on right now for changes in legislation. So it seems like Serbia is doing much better in terms of improving the legislation, but Albania is lacking behind. Of course, not that changes in legislation will solve all the problems. So let's go to our case study. Again, our main focus was to look into the types, motives, and impacts of violence against women in Albanian politics. And given that this was the first in-depth study and we anticipated several challenges, we decided to employ storytelling, which is used very often in social work. So if we study topics that are sensitive, or we anticipate that study participants, have difficulties communicating the problems they are facing, it's better to ask them to share their stories. And we are aware that in the context of Albania, there is lots of stigma associated with violence, and even more with political violence. One of the beliefs that is shared quite widely is that women politicians do not experience violence, and violence is only targeting women who are not very educated or who come from a poor background and so forth. Of course, these are stereotypes, but they are commonly used. So we said, what is the best way we can collect data? And we thought, okay, let's try storytelling. So email invitations were sent to 112 women politicians. So you may ask, why 112? This was a data set that was developed by Gildona and myself, and also UNDP office in Tirana. So they had their collaborators, and they said, okay, these are people who can say yes and they can participate. We thought that it's a good idea to have a very diverse sample. So, looking into variables such as length of political experience, position held, age, and ability, and so forth. So we anticipated very low response rate, and for the reasons I mentioned. And yes, from 112, 20 women agreed to participate in the study. Of course, there is a response bias in here, because those who said will participate, of course, they were more willing to share their experiences. We got responses such as, I have never experienced political violence. We also found out that when people hear violence, they mainly think about physical violence. They don't think about economic violence, or symbolic violence, or other types of violence, or sexual violence, and so forth. So we did provide information, we did provide a definition. We try to give a lot of details, but at the end, we only had 20 women who agreed to participate in the study. Interviews were conducted virtually, by phone, or in person. They were conducted during 2021, 2022, if I'm not mistaken, and Gildona can correct me. So this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we opted for the virtual option, and there are some disadvantages with that. And during the discussion session, we'll be happy to talk about it more. So here are the questions that we had. Can you share an experience with us? After we provided the definition of political violence, and we said, can you share an experience? Please provide details about the event. What happened? When did it happen? Who were the actors involved? What were the motives of the perpetrator, and how did the experience affect you? So again, these questions connect with our conceptual framework, as we were interested in understanding the types, motives, and impacts of violence against women in politics. Here, we have some information about the sample characteristics. The mean age was 46 years, and the mean number of years in politics was 13. And women had diverse backgrounds in education, finance, social work, law, medicine, engineering, and filmmaking. We have more information about the sample in the research report, though we try to provide as little information as possible, because the topic was sensitive, and some of the cases we studied, were public, and we didn't want people to associate those characteristics with women's experiences. And we used pseudonyms throughout the text, of course. So let me share some of our findings. We found, that, mainly women talked about psychological violence and economic violence. They shared experiences of belittlement and offensive language, interruptions while they were taking the floor, or jeers, insults, dirty jokes, and false accusations and threats. We have provided here 2 examples, which I think go along Yura's theme of silencing women. So grow up because you don't know anything yet, or you have a voice, I didn't know that. Other practices were threatening women to prevent them from pursuing their own agenda, or removing women from party candidate lists. So we had cases when members of political parties would visit women in their houses and say, you should not take the floor and discuss this particular topic, and threaten them. As we mentioned here, stories of economic violence were abundant. So this was especially for women who were part of the public sector. So women who were part of local councils and worked in the public sector, they said that, if I don't follow the will of party leaders, this is going to cost me a lot. Not only myself, but family members as well. So it was better for them to follow the guidelines of political leaders. Okay, I'm going to give the floor to Gildona now, my colleagues. She will talk about the motives of political violence and the impacts, and then draw conclusions. So Gildona, let me know when you want me to shift the slides. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Marcela. Hello, everyone. I would like to share some findings related to motives and impacts of violence against women in politics. So throughout our study and conducting the interviews and storytellings, we found out that, as also mentioned previously by our colleague, that of course perpetrators of violence look for to maintain their position of power inside the political party, but also in other domains of power, such as also in local councils, in the parliament, but also in public administration, if these public officials are related to the political party itself. So in order to maintain this power, perpetrators always looked for women, not only those that are newcomers in politics, but also those that actually seek for more power inside the political party. So, in order to maintain the status quo, these perpetrators of violence, of course, looked for to maintain their political office, jobs, income, assets, and of course, what is more important, their access to networks. As mentioned also previously by Marcela and other colleagues, access to network, it is one of the main sources for to give men and women in politics not only power when it comes to be elected, but also power when it comes to negotiate within their political party, but also a power when it comes to represent concerns and needs of the communities. Another form of tactic used by perpetrators of violence was, of course, digital violence, and in this case, women shared, for example, publication of blog posts that questions their ability, skills, and knowledge into the political arena. And of course, they shared that questioning their ability, sometimes in public domains, but sometimes also in gatherings inside of the political party, it triggered gender discrimination, and as a consequence, also it influenced the voting process. Moreover, other tactics used were limiting the women's role when it comes to already made decisions. As you may know, if a political party has a strong structural and hierarchy inside, of course, that its members will vote as the leadership asks. So this kind of structure inside the political party, of course, impacts also how the women vote, and also it influences their role in the eyes of the public. For example, one of the women that in her story, she shared that when she decided to run for office, she was not welcomed by the men in her electoral area zone. She shared that I faced the resistance, and they told me they don't have any problem with me, but they prefer a man. And this shows exactly that although certain perpetrators of violence, in case political party members or community members that have power within the political party, try to hide in a way the discrimination toward a woman, but still they, when she's running for office, they will make the violence more visible. She shared that they prefer a man, not because he will do a better job at representing them, but because they will sit together, have a drink, smoke, have a glass of raki, beer, and discuss things they would not be able to discuss with me. In this way, Neda kind of described the stereotyping political domain run by men, especially, we would say, in not only in rural communities, but also in those communities where for many years men were the main political actors. Furthermore, we stopped actually, and Marcela, throughout the research, she wanted also to emphasize what happens to women that actually are looking to have a higher role in the political arena. Also when it comes to within their political party, but also when they were looking for to have a leadership in their political career. And we found out that women that wanted to reach a higher leadership position, they felt that their own political party was the main source of violence. And these women shared that for them, the violence inside the party, it was complex but also very difficult to address. Also, although these motives of that they are seeking always to keep the power, the political power within a certain circle, and most of the times they are the men that seek to keep the status quo political power. We also explored the impact that have these motives of forms of violence to the women. The women politicians that shared this story said that they were targeted by false accusation and rumors in media. And they reported that these experiences, of course, had the impact not only in their political career, but also in their personal life, that affected also their mental health. Later, if Marcela could help. For example, one of the women politicians, which we named Gentiana, she was accused that she was the leader's her party's leader's mistress, and these false accusations were spread throughout social media, and they were targeting her not only during the electoral campaign, but during her political career. And she said that she felt very ashamed, not only because for sure this was true, but she was also a public person. She was a professor, and her students were reading the news, and then she had to face and to go in front of the students. And she shared that this truths that they were shared can never be deleted or distorted, and the insult itself is very grave, not only for her political career but her personal life as well. Women politicians shared that, of course, these false accusations and rumors have also influenced their relationships with their partners. For example, one woman that she was elected in a rural community. She shared that she was going always as a politician. She was attending the political party's meetings, and people went to her husband and asked him, why is she going in this gathering, in this meeting of the political party? It shows that sometimes when perpetrators of violence cannot directly address the woman, the politician, then they can find access through family members, and in this case, they went through her husband to try to keep her away from the political discussions. Another impact of the violence against women in politics was also self-doubt, as also shared by the previous presentations. There is always a moment when they say to women that you don't know nothing about politics, or you are new in here and you don't understand how things are done. And for example, Aurora, she shared that because her abilities and skills were questioned, she was also self-doubting that she could make it in the local council. And then she looked around, and I will read. She said that when I looked around in the council, I realized that I was one of the most qualified. And sometimes this kind of threats or direct accusation about the ability of women in politics, of course, come from the member of the party or other colleagues in the council, but in this case, for example, came directly from the chair of the council, which is supposed to hold the trust of other members of the party he represents, and also it means that he's speaking on their behalf. So actually, this would be called also organized violence against women in politics. As per our conclusions, which we can see that they are not far from also the presentations made by our colleagues, we also confirmed that there is psychological violence that women experience throughout their political career. And this psychological violence can take shape, different shapes that Marcela mentioned before: belittlement, interruptions, dirty jokes, jeers. And in most of the cases, they are also considered as routine acts because they happen so often. So they come in a way very normalized, and also they kind of make it very difficult for women and men that are involved in politics to be seen as actually forms of violence, because they are normalizing this kind of violent acts. Another form of violence that women shared was, of course, economic violence. This, I'd say, that is a little bit difficult to be recognized, because it's not a violence. It's not a type of violence that it is easily identified. However, in this case, we classified as a violence that can be manifested, for example, as threats of job dismissal. Furthermore, we saw that, similar to other countries that have a process of democratization, like Albania, women also, when women face resistance and backlash against their political empowerment, the problem itself lies in their own political party. Throughout our research, we saw that the political party and members of the political party hold the key into accelerating or making stronger and more visible the violence against their own colleagues, the women politicians, or they can hold also the key to make stronger internal regulations within the party, how to minimize violence, and how to protect politicians from not only violence that comes within the party, but violence that comes also from other political actors. Moreover, women politicians shared that the experience that they have about political violence within their political party, it is impossible to address for as long as a political party lacks internal democracy. And this statement comes from one main year, that it means that she had a lot of steps to take and become and be elected as a mayor, but herself, she does not see she does not see that the political party itself is still supporting her political career. Political violence, of course, can affect, as we mentioned, not only the political career of women, but also their personal life, and such as health problems, mental health, and it is a key factor into determining if a woman will pursue later a political career or just will leave politics. And these effects, of course, are not targeting only women, but they also extend to their family member and to their other impacts, and which are a bit complex maybe to explain within this research that we did. But one of those was accusations that had a sexual nature. And lastly, we would also like to share some limitation of the research and some suggestions for the future. We would suggest that for a deeper understanding of violence that women experience in politics, studies and researchers should adopt a more intersectional approach. And also that we would like to suggest that programs or activities, interventions that are made to empower women in politics should also, in a way, expose the violence that men do to women, and also they should make public all the stories that undermine and are discriminate and that discriminate women's political life. And with that, we thank you a lot for being with us and listen to our presentation. I don't know, maybe Marcela would like to add something regarding the acknowledgements of the research team.
No, I think we have a list there. We know, like, we thank women who participated in the research project. It's not very easy to share experiences, difficult experiences, as well as, mentors. And we thank you as well for your patience. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Luisa, thank you very much for your excellent speeches. We enjoyed them a lot. And I suggest that we go to the questions section. Is it okay, Naida? Oh. Now, if you, after hearing all these barriers and violence against women in politics, I'm very curious, who's gonna be a politician in our region? It might be challenging, You'll enjoy it if you go for politics. And if you have more questions or something you wanna know more specifically, here you have 4 speakers. So the floor is yours. Now, go with the questions. Yeah. You should come a little bit closer and louder. Yeah. Okay?
Yeah. Well, hi, one more time. Actually, I'm in the third year and I study political science. So basically, it kind of relates with what I study, but I also work in a civic society organization that is focused on gender-based violence, not only, but this year especially. So basically, because of my work, I know that in Albania, we do not have gender sensitive political parties. And even if we think that we have policies that are gender-based sensitive, we actually have them, but at the same time, they are not really effective or are not really strong. And actually, they do not function all the time. Because as for example, in July, I remember that when the election code was like being discussed in the parliament, they almost removed the gender quota in the parliament for the next election. So there would be no 1 in 3 people being a woman in the parliament if the civic society organization at that time didn't react. And basically that would change in like 2 seconds, but it took more than 10 years to be where it is. At the same time as, for example, in the municipalities for council representatives, there is the quota of the 50%, but when it comes to mayors, there's no quota. So in that case, we see that the number of people candidating for mayors is lower because the political parties doesn't have the real desire to have women as candidates, but they do it when they are forced to do so. So that's just the context to say that in Albania, we do not have gender sensitive political parties, and even the policies that are gender sensitive aren't really strong, because if it took only 2 days to almost remove the gender quota for the parliament, it means that it's not really strong and it's not really going up. I want to know the situation in Serbia and Slovenia, and if you think that you have gender sensitive policies and political parties, and at the same time, how do you monitor that? And thank you for the time and all the explanations. I would also ask if we can have the PowerPoint presentations, especially from the speakers that did it. Thank you.
Okay, Liliana, would you go or should I go?
You can go first, yes.
Okay, I can start. So yeah, thank you for your question. In Slovenia, things are a bit complicated. So our first election as an independent state were in 1992. In 2004, we introduced gender quotas on all levels. So a national level, meaning parliamentary level, also local level, and European for European elections, because in 2004 we joined the European Union. However, it took until 2011. It took us until 2011 that we actually achieved the critical mass of 30% of women in parliaments, in parliament, which was 7 years, quite a long period of time. And in that time, there were also various pre-term elections, so meaning it could be achieved earlier. What happened then was that in 2014, we had the historically highest percentage of women in parliaments, 33%, and then a sudden drop in 2018 to 23, 24%, something like that. And then what happened, and that's why 2022 elections were so interesting for our research. In 2022, the political party who was the most prominent and who later won the elections was very, let's put it this way, it advertised itself as gender sensitive and having gender sensitive policies and promoting gender equality, so equal political representation, and so on. And what happened is also because of the civil society engagement and so on, in 2022, 40% of women were elected in Slovenian parliament, which is the highest in history. Also, we had the highest percentage of ministers in our government in 2022, which which really somehow showed and complied with what the winning party was actually talking about, you know, being gender sensitive, promoting gender equality, and so on. But what happened in later years, especially in 2023, and what's happening this year is rather alarming, because there have been quite a few changes, especially in the government, and it was mostly women ministers who were replaced, and they were not replaced by women. They were actually replaced by men. And this was raised as a question in a few months ago to our prime minister. What is actually going on with this gender sensitivity when it comes to political parties, especially his party? And he did not actually have a clear answer. Also, perhaps one other thing, and I should conclude with that to not be too long. During the summer, we were conducting interviews with a few women politicians, also from right-wing parties, and it was interesting what we discovered from the Christian Democrats, so a center-right party, that one of its former leader, also a woman politician, actually said that during her time and during the time of her predecessor, despite being a center-right party, they were very much inclined towards, you know, gender equality policies and being gender sensitive and so on. But this later changed after, when her successor came to power, when he became the president of the country. And when I asked her why this happened, so why women were suddenly pushed back and did not and were given a lesser role, she said it's young, ambitious men who think that they should be running politics. So it's not only happening in parties we would expect, but also in some, you know, parties who can be aligned with more center-right ideology, when they have the right leadership, which is, you know, inclined towards being gender sensitive and towards gender equality.
Okay, I can say a few things about Serbia. It's a very specific situation because from 2007, introducing the quota, 30% quota, we have a constant growing number of women in parliament, and it would not be a problem because I think now we have 40% quota, legal quota for elections, but the main problem of the representation of women in politics is lying in political party system. Especially political parties, they are dominant or they are larger, and also which promote more women in parliament and political institutions, because of the power and the status of those women. We have it's very interesting to research the period from 2020 when was the first election, and the ruling party, Progressive Party, won majority, because of very soon after these elections we have the construction of parliamentary it's unofficial parliamentary network of women politicians from all political parties. And it was very interesting because it was we can say such enthusiasm and also a very unwillingness to work on political promotion and representation of more representation of women, substantial representation of women in parliament. But it takes maybe a few years, and after the whole concept of this network deteriorating step by step, And till maybe a few years from now, few years ago, we had the big problem with some political parties because they have some kind of ghettoization of their women in organizations. And that's a big problem because if you have a few women, just a few women in party, in organization, and also put them in a closed specific space that they do not have power and that they do not can share their capacity and also their willingness to make some I mean improvement in their career, in political careers. That's a big problem for gender equality issue in politics generally, and especially in institutions. And nowadays we have a problem with women in, for instance, in Progressive Party. They are elected and nominated, and almost, I think, about 39 in parliament. But you know, the problem of loyalty and also the problem of clientelism, it's close connected with their political activity. And you will find very, very often that their husbands, maybe their fathers, husbands or brothers, they are connected and they are involved in more most important positions in Progressive Party. Also, they are working and they are giving to very, very lucrative business projects. And in that case, we can say that women, in that case, they are working for them and working for party. They are not working in parliament and political institution. They are not working for women. That's the big problem that we are facing now, and also we can fix it just to transform the political parties, the organization, because they are very leadership organized. I mean, one man on the top, he is the leader of the party, and he had the main decisions, and he proposed those women that they are the mostly fit in the concept of I think some kind of enterprise, political enterprise or political business, you know, that's the problem of business. Okay, I think it's quite similar in the other countries in the region, maybe Slovenia and Croatia, but I'm not sure about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And do we have more questions or?
Merita,
Yeah.
Donna speaking. I would like only shortly say something regarding the question about gender quota discussion in Albania in the parliament in July. Just shortly, I would like to say that this is, like, in my opinion, the gender quota, it's not a shield to protect women in politics. The gender quota in Albania came especially as a political win built from the political parties. That means that it is always going to be in discussion based on what the political parties want to do with the gender quota. And as such, it is always at risk to eliminate the gender quota. So what we should do as researchers, as activists, as also people that work in politics, what is the main important thing? It is to work within the political party. We need to have a more democratic system inside the party. Because what happens if next year that we have the elections in the parliament of Albania, we are going to have members of the parliaments that majority of them are against the gender quota. They will eliminate the gender quota. And then again, we will go back 15 years ago with lower number of women in the parliament, but we need to work with the political party itself. And then if the political party itself has a clear process of nominating, of candidating women and men, but having a system of support for women, then the gender quota, it will be discussed how to enforce it and how to protect more women and how to empower more women, rather than always to have the discussion, should we have women in the parliament or should we not have women in the parliament? So as young people, and I'm sure that most of the students are politically involved, please do work with your community members in the political party to support women from the moment that they are nominated and until they reach an electoral position, such in local councils or in the parliament.
Thank you, Gaby. If there are no more questions, then I will thank the speakers. So thank you very much. This was such fruitful knowledge shared by you with us, and we will take on the discussion after this webinar and go deep with discussions after with students, maybe with papers. They can explore themselves how is the situation here and elsewhere in the region, because we need more voices from the region in order for us to not only understand the causes of and barriers impeding women entering and staying in politics, but as well the forms of violence and what are the measures to counteract all these kinds of violences, especially the digital one, which is this hidden enemy behind the screen, which we are fighting a lot to find ways to counteract. Now I would declare this meeting closed, and thank you for all the contributions. They are very helpful for me to understand the situation, for students, and for everybody who have been has been following today this meeting, because I heard that there have been some 60 people registered and following the meeting today. I don't see them, but I thank them all for participating today. And I wish we have a community of supporters and activists and women rights defenders, as Gaby said, to support women to candidate and stay in positions as elected and as nominated in executive positions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nerita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
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 Bye.